All right, well, I'm going to stand back here because I understand that I'm probably better in screen here, right, Kathy?
Yes, you are
Okay.
screen. But make sure you speak up so that people can hear you.
So, welcome everyone to the Northwest Indiana version of the Advisory Committee Roadshow. What I would like to do just to kind of start off is just introduce a few key people. You'll hear too much from me as this day goes on. I am Sean Seals. I'll introduce myself more formally as we get into this a little bit further. And then we have John and Valerie also made the road trip up here from Indianapolis. If you have any questions of IDEM staff, feel free to reach out to any of the three of us while we are here. And Valerie has asked me to make sure to remind folks, if you want to make a formal comment, there are cards over on the table. Please grab a card, put the necessary information in the card, either give it to Valerie, and give it to Valerie and she will quietly sneak it up here to the front table, and then we'll make sure that you have time for comments. So with that, I would like to introduce just the two advisory committee members that we have today. I think they can introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves real quick.
Good evening. I'm Kay Nelson. I am Director of Environmental Affairs at the Northwest Indiana Forum, and along with my two compadres, welcome Justice. I've been appointed by Governor Holcomb to the VW Trust Board. Many of you have met me and worked with me on various projects before, and I'll let Jody and Justice introduce themselves.
I'm Jody Peacock. I'm Vice President for the Ports of Indiana, and I also serve along with Kay on the Great Lakes Commission, and I'm a co-chair for the Great Lakes Maritime Initiative, trying to expand the use of maritime trade on the Great Lakes. Been with the ports 17 years and happy to join this initiative.
My name is Brent Dixon. I'm a Hobart Brickie. That was 55 years ago, or longer actually. I'm one of the governor's citizen appointees, and I'm former Chief Justice of Indiana.
And if you'll allow me, I have a brief written comment that I have been asked to share with you. Welcome to the public meeting here at the Northwest Indiana Regional Area. They are here to provide information and gather comments on Indiana's beneficiary mitigation plan to distribute funds available to the state through a settlement with the Volkswagen Corporation. As many of you are already probably aware, Indiana projects are eligible to receive nearly $41 million over the next 10 years in order to mitigate excess NOx emissions from Volkswagen vehicles. Reads weird. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide more information and receive input on the process Indiana will use to identify and fund eligible projects. As will be explained by Sean further in the presentation, in an executive order dated October 4th, 2017, Governor Holcomb designated the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, or IDEM, as the lead agency for administering the trust funds. He also created a committee comprised of state agency heads and citizen members to assist IDEM in finalizing and implementing its beneficiary mitigation plan. Committee members are present tonight to hear from the citizens of Indiana on the types of projects they would like to see funded, and to accept feedback on the draft plan that IDEM has made available on their website, to ask questions about your prepared statement or comment, or share a dialogue with you when you ask questions. Before IDEM begins their presentation, we would like to inform members of the public that committee members from the trust. In order to comply with these rules, as well as to avoid any appearance of undue influence, committee members will be restricting our communications related to the trust with potential trust fund recipients to comments made in public setting, either at these meetings or through formal comments submitted to IDEM. We ask that any questions or comments about the plan or the projects to be funded be presented at this or one of other public meetings, or directed to the IDEM staff rather than to individual committee members. IDEM staff and the committee will take comments into consideration prior to finalizing the beneficiary mitigation plan and presenting it to the committee for final approval. Thank you all for coming. Thank goodness the weather has held out for us, and we all look forward to hearing from you on this draft plan and your projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
To you, Sean.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with kind of the meat of the evening, and that's to give everybody a little bit of a background on the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust, as well as sort of the process that we're working through within IDEM, including the advisory committee, as well as the purpose of these listening sessions. I think a key thing to keep in mind as we kind of go through this process, and you'll hear me repeat this through this process, is this is really a two-phase program, if you will. Phase one, which is where we are today, is in regard to the development of the beneficiary mitigation plan. Phase two will come later this year, most likely, and that will be when we start to really look at project applications, put a solicitation for projects on the street, and more the detailed on-the-ground emission reduction project side. Phase one, BMP, phase two, actual projects. So with a brief introduction here, you'll see on this first slide, my title at IDEM is Senior Environmental Manager. My co-title, if you will, is I am the administrator of the Dieselwise Indiana program. The Dieselwise Indiana program at IDEM's Office of Air Quality has been around for roughly 17 years. I've been around longer than that, and I have lived through pretty much each and every day of Dieselwise Indiana. So what we're talking about here today with Volkswagen is very similar, and I only bring that up to let you know that you can feel confident that we actually know what we are talking about when it comes to diesel emission reduction strategies and the like. So we're going to just briefly touch on a few things. This is that outline slide that you're going to see in every presentation that's going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. So I'm going to tell you this real quick. We're going to talk a little bit about the background and the trust settlement itself. We're going to talk about the Indiana version of the program, what our program really looks like, what the plan for it is shaping up to look like. We're going to talk about eligible mitigation projects. This is going to be a key part of our evening together, is to talk about projects that are eligible under Volkswagen and projects that are not eligible under Volkswagen, so to speak. We're going to touch on the beneficiary mitigation plan and what it must include. We're going to talk about the comment period and kind of what we're looking for there. We're going to also touch on how the beneficiary mitigation plan is intended to be developed. And then finally, we will touch briefly on that phase two portion I mentioned a few minutes ago, that is the solicitation for projects and what that process may look like. So with that, let's get started on the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust, what it really means. For those who may not know, Volkswagen was found to have developed 2 and 3 liter diesel vehicles roughly through 2009 to 2016. These 2009 to 2016 vehicles had computer algorithms built into them that basically convinced or tricked, if you will, the onboard system to know when to have the emissions control technology turned on versus when to have it turned off. What ultimately happened is these things that are often called defeat devices, even though it's a computer algorithm, it knew if it was driving up and down the road, it would turn the emission control devices off to improve fuel efficiency. And then if it was being tested, it would turn them back on to make sure the tailpipe standards were met. The end result and the problem is a tremendous amount of NOx emissions were emitted from these vehicles across the nation. In response to that, the settlement kind of equates out to this mathematically. Volkswagen will spend $14.7 billion in a combination of ways. They will spend $10 billion to either buy back, or what it says is buy back or fix the vehicles that were affected. They're going to spend $2 billion on a zero emission vehicle investment. This is a program administered by Volkswagen, primarily focused on increasing the amount of electric vehicles on the road. And then the last part of that 14.7, which is what we're here to talk about today, is the $2.7 billion that is being allocated to the states for Environmental Mitigation Trust. Basically, to take these funds and attempt to mitigate the excess NOx emissions that were brought into the atmosphere of various states. So for those who are curious to know, how did we get $41 million out of $2.7 billion? The math was relatively straightforward. What was done was they took all of these affected vehicles, identified where they were located, and from that they basically determined what each state's impact was on these 2 and 3 liter vehicles. Our impact equated to $41 million. Now, Kay mentioned earlier that the program is a 10-year program. It is an up to 10-year program. Can be no less than 3 years, and it can be no more than 10 years. The logic behind the 3 to 10 is 3 years is a reasonable amount of time for Volkswagen to roll out $2.7 billion in basically cash money without dramatically affecting their ability to survive as a company. And 10 years seems like that's plenty of time. If you can't spend it in 10 years, you might just not know how to spend it, is probably the mentality. So here's the timeline. Some of these things that you're going to see on this timeline are historic, meaning they've happened already. Some of these things have happened very recently, and some of these things are what we'll be talking about as we kind of move into the future. So quickly to go back in time only for a tad here. In October of 2016 was kind of when this all started. That's when the court approved the partial settlement with Volkswagen, and then everything kind of started from there. In October of 2017, about a year later, the trust was filed and Volkswagen deposited those funds into the trust fund. On October 4th, as Kay mentioned earlier, Governor Holcomb signed an executive order creating the advisory committee that will be responsible for taking important steps to identify how best to roll out a program here in Indiana. November 17th of last year, we filed the formal documents to be named the beneficiary on behalf of the state of Indiana, and by we I mean IDEM. And then on January 29th, not that long ago, we actually received word from the trustee along with 50 other states and the 2 territories that we were all approved to be beneficiaries on behalf of our entities. So we are official now as the beneficiary per the trustee. In the summer of this year, we will probably be able to start requesting funds. The fund request is kind of driven in a backwards way. After we actually file the beneficiary mitigation plan, maybe in the spring of this year, the funds are then available around 30 days after that has been approved. So we're probably looking spring-ish of this year to hopefully have a BMP filed with the trustee. And then summer, fall of this year is when we're kind of hoping that the solicitation hits the street and we can really start talking about some of the great project ideas that folks have been bringing forward. So just to talk a little bit about some of the events of October 4th, one of the key events of October 4th was we rolled out a Volkswagen Mitigation Trust program website on the IDEM website. This will be the portal for many, many things. So has everybody been to IDEM's VW website? Let me rephrase. Is there anybody that has not been? Okay, if you haven't been there, I would encourage you to hit the website for a couple reasons. One is the first bullet. You will actually get an opportunity to sign up for automated email updates when changes or anything takes place on the website. That way you will know anytime a change is made, because what our intent is to use that website as kind of the portal for everything. So if we change the draft beneficiary mitigation plan, if we have a media release, anything that is going to be related to Volkswagen will be found on that website. If you signed up for that, you will know when those things happen. Also on the website is some background information on the settlement. Enough, but not too much to bore folks too much there, just enough to know why we're doing this and why it's important. There's clear information on what are eligible projects, and we're going to touch on those as well here in a bit. And I think it's key to note that those eligible projects are what are specifically included in the mitigation trust document. It's the legal document that drives what is eligible. It is not IDEM, it is not the advisory committee, it is the legal document, the mitigation trust. And then there will be all kinds of links there for other interesting bits along the way. So if we touch on what are eligible mitigation projects, there are a lot of different types of projects that have great value in Indiana and across the nation. These are the types of projects that were specifically identified in the mitigation trust. On the front end, I would point out that the majority of these projects will be either diesel engine or diesel vehicle replacement projects. They will be model year 1992 through 2009, I believe, in most cases. And they also, if you note the box note there, public and private entities are both eligible for funding through this program. It is not a public program, it is not a private program, it is an all-inclusive program. So the types of projects that we're really talking about here are Class A local freight trucks and portage drayage trucks. So we're basically talking about some heavy hauling trucks there, sort of your over-the-road looking trucks. Class 4 through 8, school, shuttle, and transit buses. Buses serve a real great value across the state of Indiana. Here's an opportunity for us to do something positive with those. Freight switcher locomotives. These are the locomotives that are moving the rail cars in switch yards and on factory sites, but they have to be below 2,000 horsepower because that's what qualifies them as a locomotive. In many cases, what we find is there are long-haul locomotives that have been retired and moved to switch yard work. Those do not qualify as switcher locomotives because of the horsepower that they carry. Ferry and tugboat projects are also eligible. These would more than likely be diesel engine replacements. Class 4 through 7 local trucks, these are more like the box trucks, sort of, I call them maybe more of a medium duty truck that you would see. Same thing, we're talking about replacing the engines or potentially replacing the vehicle itself. Airport ground support equipment is a really exciting and new feature that was included in the Mitigation Trust. Through all of my years with DERA, being able to address GSE equipment on airports has not historically been an option. This is a really exciting option, and we hope that folks will take advantage of it. Forklifts and cargo handling equipment at ports. You all have a port in your backyard. Not every place I go and speak is going to have that as an area of interest. If it's something you want us to make sure to include, be sure to let us know, and we'll touch on that in a bit. Light duty, zero electric vehicle supply equipment is also eligible. You'll see parenthetically it says we can use up to 15% of our total application or allocation for that purpose. The key thing to remember there is the maximum is 15%, and also it's supply equipment. Also, everybody, what most people would call infrastructure. This is not to buy vehicles, it's to develop the infrastructure that will charge and supply the vehicles. And then the last option is the Diesel Emission Reduction Act option, the DERA option as it's called. And what this does is it's an option to use trust funds for actions that are not specifically identified within the Mitigation Trust. It's an area that provides us a little bit more flexibility. It is kind of an over and above type of program. It is not specifically either or. I think that's an important thing here. When we look at these are all eligible mitigation types. So we could allocate funds to each and every one of those in a different percentage in a different way. It isn't, there is some misconception allocate a piece of the Volkswagen funds as our match for our DERA program, and then we are using it in both cases. It's not an either or. So what must the beneficiary mitigation plan include? These are kind of the highlights of what the plan must include according to the Mitigation Trust document, that legal document that is driving everything that we do. It must explain the beneficiary's overall goal for the use of the trust funds. In essence, it just needs to tell folks what we plan to do. Pretty straightforward, right? Describe the NOx reductions the beneficiary expects its plan to achieve. We have to include some sort of math in there that demonstrates that there are going to be NOx reductions if we do this type of a plan. List the categories of projects the beneficiary intends to implement. Just a slide or two back, we talked about the eligible project types, right? What this is saying is just list those categories. You don't need to tell us what projects they are going to be. Just list the project category types that you think will have value in Indiana. Explain how the beneficiary will consider benefits to air quality in communities with a disproportionate air pollution burden. This one, in essence, is saying there are a variety of ways that one can identify an area that is an area of air pollution or disproportionate air pollution burden, as they call it. This can be classified by monitor readings, by vehicle traveled, vehicle miles traveled. There are many, many, many different ways that we can identify the areas that may see a disproportionate air pollution burden. There's no one way to do this. Explain how it will seek and consider public input. In essence, all that's saying is just tell them how you did what we're doing right now, right? And then the last one, make other statements to allow the public and the trustee to better understand the goals of the plan. To me, what that last statement is saying is Don't get caught up in all of your jargon. Make sure when everybody sees this, it makes sense to them and they understand what the plan is and what you're envisioning down the road. So as mentioned, the beneficiary mitigation plan is now open for comments. What we have is we have what we refer to as the draft beneficiary mitigation plan framework. It is a very general document. It does not give a clear indication of any direction that IDEM or the advisory committee is leaning, because we are not. Every comment that we get, regardless of how big or how small, means something to us. We want to hear from each and every person that has any interest in this and know what they think. Specifically, the types of things that we are looking for, we're looking for folks to give us input on the various mitigation trust project types. You know, we talked about all those different project types. So of the project types you see in that first section, the question would be, what percent allocation, for example, do you think we should put towards diesel vehicle replacements versus marine applications or locomotives? What's that? Oh, I've got it over here. I'm just too lazy to walk that far. But thank you. Then the other half of it becomes we also want to know, when it comes to the Diesel Emission Reduction Act, the DERA option, do folks find that appealing? Do you want us to consider allocating some of those funds towards the DERA option? What types of projects contained within the DERA option do you think would be really valuable to include in an Indiana plan? Now you may be thirsty.
Sorry.
I doubled up. It's also tea, so I'll get home too. In addition to that, we're seeking input on, this is a very, very popular conversation topic, the light duty zero emissions infrastructure. We can allocate up to 15% towards charging stations, basically, infrastructure costs for electric vehicles. What do you all think? Good idea? Not such a good idea? 15%? 2%? We want you to tell us. We don't want to have to decide what this is all by ourselves, because in the end, it's your plan. We're just here to help implement it. And then among other things, I think these are kind of the key points that I would say should sort of be in your minds to drive some comments. Think about these things when you hit that website and you start providing some comments. What percent of the funding should go towards those eligible project types, as I mentioned before? Matching requirements to leverage the funds. Within the Mitigation Trust, it allows for a maximum of 100% for public fleets, and it allows for a maximum of 75% for private fleets. What match percent do you feel makes the most sense? And also, what match percentages do you feel they should be for public versus private? In the case of the maximums, the Mitigation Trust is putting one here and one here. We want to know what you all think of that. These are the caps. These are not requirements. We could match everything at 50% if that's what Indiana stakeholders tell us they want us to do. What should be a maximum award amount? Because when we look at this, if you take that $41 million, it's roughly 13.6 a year. When you're looking at projects that would include marine and locomotive, for example, those could eat up a lot of money real fast. What do you see as a maximum award amount that is reasonable, large enough to really accomplish something, but small enough to make sure the guy next door gets some funding too for his projects? And then lastly, priority of eligible project types. And you know, you may find that by allocating these percentages, that sort of sets a priority. But what I find is a lot of folks will say, we think that 50% should go to this project type, but they still don't rank that as what they see as the highest priority. It's actually only the third highest priority, but they feel that the money should go there simply because it needs more money to make an impact. So what do you think of that? So we're asking for that as well. So those are the kind of things we want you to be we want that to be spinning in your head as you provide those comments. So now we'll talk a little bit about the beneficiary mitigation plan, the development process. And that's what we're here really to talk about today. This is, as I said, this is that phase 1 conversation. Phase 2 happens a little bit later, but we will touch on it. So as we are right now, we're taking formal comments on the types of projects, project funding distribution, grantee match requirements, and other input. Everything happens, as it says, through the web portal. In that website, you will find there is a separate email address that is a VW Trust email address. That is the address that formal comments need to go to. They don't need to come to me. They need to go to that address so that they all are in the same place and we can consider them all at the same time and in the same way. So that's the public's part right there. IDEM will take those comments from that process. We're going to develop a final draft BMP for review and approval of the advisory committee. Then we bring that to the advisory committee. They're going to take a look at that final BMP, and then they're going to also maybe take some comments from interested parties, and they're going to approve or recommend changes or whatever it might be to that BMP. So maybe we make changes, maybe they look at it and say, this is great. We'll get to that process and we'll see where it goes from there. After the advisory committee approves that BMP, it will then go to IDEM's commissioner, and the commissioner will then submit that plan on behalf of the state of Indiana as the beneficiary. So finally, we're going to touch on that part that everybody is most excited about probably, and that is, how do I get my project funded? And although I, because I've been doing this for 17 years, love that part too, we really, really, really need folks to contribute to part one, phase one, so that we can have a solid phase two. Phase two will more than likely look like this. We'll post a solicitation for eligible projects online. Who in here is familiar with Diesel-Wise, Indiana? Okay, everybody that raised your hands, is going to probably look pretty similar to that. You know, the cliche, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So that's probably what it's going to look like. The application, folks are going to submit their applications in accordance with the requirements and the expectations of the solicitation. So it's going to really identify, this is what needs to be included in your application. It comes to us, we will then review, score, and prioritize, and then subsequently recommend projects to the advisory committee. One key thing I want to add in that review and recommendation portion as it relates to potential applicants is that also, as a part of the solicitation, not only are you going to know what all has to be included in the application, you're also going to know what the evaluation criteria that we are using to look at projects and score them is going to be. One of the things that you've seen over the years with Diesel-Wise Indiana is we try to be very transparent with the way that that works. You know on the front end what to make sure to do for a quality application that scores well. This will be the same. You will know what those evaluation criteria are at the time of your application. Project presentations will then take place at some point. The advisory committee is going to review our recommendations, and then they're going to take presentations from applicants at designated meetings. Honestly, we don't know what this is going to look like yet. This is a conversation point, and I think that's an important thing to keep in mind is this whole process, for the most part, is somewhat fluid. These are the visions of how we think they're going to go, but they may change here or there. And then the last step, of course, is the exciting step where somebody gets an award. The advisory committee is going to approve projects to be formally accepted for funding. It doesn't say that on the slide, but then it ultimately will bounce back to IDEM, and through the Office of Air Quality, we will process the grant applications more than likely in the same way that we've been doing Diesel-Wise for all these years. That pretty much wraps that up. I think the more information slide here, there's some key things to kind of note here. The Volkswagen Mitigation Trust website, this is the short version of how to get to the website. Of course, like everybody, if you just want to Google Indiana VW Trust, you're going to hit the website that way too. Submit beneficiary mitigation plan comments. That's the email address I was talking about. That is for formal comments that you want to make, or informal, I guess. It's not really, they don't have to be a formal 10-page document. It can be nothing more than an email with 3 sentences, which we've had several of those as well. So if you have comments you want to make, that's the email address you're looking for. If you have questions about the process, then you can use that Seals Guys email address and reach out to me, and I can help you with that part. But we really want to make sure comments end up in one place, questions end up in somewhere else. So at this point, we'll open it up for any questions that folks might have. on the information that you've seen in front of you. And just so you know, what we're planning to do is we're going to do the Q&A session as it relates to the presentation and the information you've heard so far. And then once all the questions are addressed, okay, you'll start working through the formal comment process. So with that, questions?
Good evening, Sean. Just a question.
Can you introduce yourself for the audience,
Sure.
please?
My name is Carl Lissick with U.S. Department of Energy Clean Cities program here in Northwest Indiana, Center Clean Cities. Sean, I just had a question in regards to the public comments. Will those be made available to the public?
Yes, the plan is that public comments as well as a frequently asked questions document will be made available on the VW Trust website. Since we are right now really just ramping up at taking comments in forums like this as well as online, and the comment period, as I didn't mention yet, but I will now, with the comment period being open until the end of March, we don't necessarily want to be putting out, what those comments are now. We want to have a good quality amount of comments to kind of publish on the website. So yes, they will be published on the website, as well as the frequently asked questions will be published on the website. Those are more than likely going to happen after we kind of finish this roadshow with the advisory committee, so we have a good volume of good quality comments to share. Anybody else? Yes.
Tom DiGiulio, Tom and Dyer. I'm not familiar with the diesel-wise application process as others are. Can you kind of give us a clue as how extensive is the application? Are inventories required for your fleet or all that kind of stuff?
It's a great question, and actually probably something we should spend a little bit more time on. When we get to that phase 2, folks will have a better feel for it. But right now, I'm still going to answer the question, obviously, and that is the application typically is pretty straightforward. It has a maximum of 10 pages, which is never really hit. We have received applications all the way from a handwritten application on notebook paper that was awarded to 15-page, 10 formal pages and 5 subsequent pages of material that folks have shared. So there's no application that's too big, no application that's too small. So I guess a teasing answer to that is don't be intimidated by the application process. And don't be afraid to kind of ask folks around you that have been a part of it. And also, you're obviously always welcome to reach out and just ask me, hey, Sean, what's this going to include? What's this going to look like? In essence, what you're going to do is just tell us what you're planning to do, how many vehicles you're planning to address, what you expect that the emission reduction potential of that project would be, what you expect the budget for that project to be, and then you ask